Welcome to ESG Unlocked, where we discuss all things ESG in private markets. Brought to you by ESG Tree. I am Rachel Green, and I am thrilled to be your host. Joining us today is Rich Green, the co-host for this series. Today, we are diving deep into tackling financed emissions, a complex but increasingly crucial topic among limited partners and pension funds. As our listeners tune in, Rich, why don't you shed some light on what's driving this heightened focus?
Absolutely, Rachel. There are several key factors at play here. First off, regulatory mandates are becoming more stringent across the globe, mandating large financial institutions to report on climate-related risks, which include their financed emissions.
But beyond regulatory compliance, what's really pushing LPs and pension funds to prioritize financed emissions is the public commitments they've made through initiatives like the PCAF, Science Based Targets Initiative, and the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, all of which require financed emission disclosures.
Exactly. And to add to all of this, countries are also setting ambitious decarbonization targets at annual COP events. And public financial institutions, including pension funds, are often the first-line movers on these targets.
So the motivations are clear, but we've seen LPs and pension funds face a key set of challenges when it comes to addressing and disclosing their financed emissions. In fact, across the board, one significant challenge we've seen LPs face is navigating the complexity around carbon calculations.
Exactly.
Emissions data, which includes Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, is often dispersed across multiple reporting entities, from layers of fund managers to their underlying portfolio companies and their respective suppliers, and this fragmentation makes data aggregation a daunting task. Since different asset classes vary in their maturity regarding capturing emissions data, this process becomes all the more convoluted.
That sounds like a data management nightmare. And unfortunately, it becomes even more difficult to manage when you consider that smaller fund managers often lack the resources, expertise, or even the willingness to conduct detailed emissions reporting, and this leads to significant gaps in their data submissions to LPs.
And even when data is available, ensuring its accuracy is another hurdle, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes. I was reading a BCG report the other day, and it turns out that even though over 90% of all emissions are Scope 3 emissions, only 12% of organizations measure them, which really speaks volumes about the gaps in emissions reporting across the value chain here.
Yeah, and I'm sure the intricate fund structures just add to the whole mix of challenges here, because without clear lines of accountability, LPs have to go through the cumbersome and resource-intensive process of gathering accurate data from multiple layers of ownership, which becomes even more complicated when they have to determine how to attribute responsibility for those emissions correctly based on the type of investment.
Precisely. And honestly, just by talking about all of this, seems like calculating Scope 3 and financed emissions accurately is an overwhelming process for everyone involved.
Yeah, it can definitely feel overwhelming, but we're seeing leading LPs and pension funds deploy some really useful best practices to navigate this complexity. For example, we're seeing some big players in the institutional landscape implement centralized data management platforms to streamline the collection and aggregation of emissions data, which essentially enhances data accuracy. We're also seeing them leverage this technology to establish clear audit trails that document data sources and methodologies, facilitating verification processes. By leveraging technology in this way,
Yeah,
these LPs are not only able to offload the burden of data collection and validation, but they're also able to identify anomalies or outliers in emissions data through automated detection systems.
I'm really glad you brought this up, Rachel, because it gives hope to our listeners that, with the right approach, they can actually overcome these obstacles and fulfill their obligations in all facets without getting charged an arm and a leg. ESG Tree is just one example of an ESG data management tool that's had a track record of transforming the ESG journeys of LPs and GPs globally. specifically as it pertains to detailed emissions and impact reporting. And now that we're at the end of today's episode, I just wanted to thank you, Rachel, for such an insightful discussion today, and to our listeners for tuning in to ESG Unlocked. Stay tuned for more on ESG for private markets by subscribing